What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Andy's History Lessons. This is also the very first episode of Special Sundays. This is a special series I plan to be randomized. So it's still part of Andy's history lessons, but I talk about random wars or events in history that are not well known. And I figured for the very first episode, I would talk about both Italo-Abyssinian wars. Now, I made references to these wars in my League of Nations videos. Now, I'm sure that some of you are wondering, well, what's Abyssinia? I've never heard of that country. Abyssinia is what modern-day Ethiopia was known as in the past. So, you're also probably wondering, well, what made Italy and Ethiopia fight each other? Well, as I said, there were two Italo-Abyssinian wars. The first one began in 1895 and it ended in 1896. What led to that, if we rewind it to the 1880s, so we've gone back one decade. Abyssinia, when I say Abyssinia, I mean Ethiopia. It's the same thing. Bear with me on that. Abyssinia had just defeated the Egyptians and the Arabs in two different wars. And in those wars, they lost their monarch, their king that came before King Menelik II. So after losing their monarch in the two wars that they won, Abyssinia was politically destabilized. They were on the brink of collapse. So when King Menelik II took power in Abyssinia, he began a political and a territorial restoration of Abyssinia. Since the people were so destabilized after losing their current monarch that came before Menelik II, they were out of control. The nation was on the brink of collapse. So King Menelik II, after stabilizing the country, went on a conquering spree, conquering the land around Abyssinia, transforming it into the landmass of Africa that it is still today, except today it's now known as Ethiopia. So, what led to the Italo-Ethiopian War in the 1890s, back at the current decade, where it actually happened, was the Treaty of Wulace. I believe that's what it's called. I may have mispronounced it. But the Treaty of Wulace, when it was translated from Amharic, the official language of Abyssinia, to Italian, it was mistranslated. The Amharic translation said Abyssinia would remain free, but if it wanted to take land, it would have to consult the Italian government. So basically what that means is, let's say Ethiopia wanted to take some land from Sudan or from Egypt or from Somalia or something along those lines. They would then have to talk to Italy to get permission, to see if the Italian government would allow them to take that land peacefully without war being declared. However, the Italian translation said that Abyssinia would become an Italian puppet state. Now, in case you don't know what a puppet state is where a foreign nation takes over another nation, either peacefully or by force, and installs a government led by a politician that is friendly towards the invading nation's government. So, let's say the foreign nation is a monarchy, and the nation that's being invaded does not have any current leader, or they're like a new nation or something like that. Well, that new nation will then become a puppet state of the invading monarchy, because a king or queen will become the leader, and that leader, being friendly to the invading nation's government, will be that leader, thereby making that country a puppet government. So that is what led to the Italo-Abyssinian War. And the Italo-Abyssinian War was actually fought between 3 different countries. What generated the tension between Abyssinia and Italy was the Abyssinians had defeated the Italians many times in the wars before the Italo-Abyssinian War. And the Italian people thought that it was scrutinizing to their military power, so they wanted payback against the Abyssinians. So General Giuseppe Baratieri, I believe that's his name, he went in as the leader in the Italo-Abyssinian War. And during the war, it was actually fought between 3 different countries: Italy, Ethiopia, and Eritrea, which at the time, the southern half of Eritrea was part of Italy. So the Italians managed to muster up a few thousand Eritrean warriors who helped the Italians fight the Abyssinians. What Italy did not know was that King Menelik II was purchasing guns and military equipment from Russia, not the Soviet Union, from Russia. Russia at the time was still known as the Russian Empire. They did not become known as the Soviet Union until the October Revolution in 1917. Perhaps I'll cover a video. Sorry, I misspoke. Perhaps I will cover that in a video, either on special Sundays or maybe whenever I start my Cold War series in the future times. So, what ended the Italo-Abyssinian War was the Battle of Adwa. Adwa is modern-day Addis Ababa, the capital city of modern-day Ethiopia. So the battle in Adwa, the capital of Abyssinia. In this battle, you had 25,000 Italian soldiers equipped with guns and artillery up against 196,000 Abyssinian soldiers. Only about 80,000 of those, only about 30,000 of those soldiers had guns. The rest had swords and spears and shields. Very primitive, very outdated equipment. However, the Italians ended up with 15,000 dead and about 3,000 captured. The Italian soldiers that were captured were safely returned to Italy at the end of the war. However, the Eritrean warriors were mutilated by the Abyssinian soldiers. This is because in previous wars, the Eritreans had supported rival governments that were trying to take over Abyssinia. So because the Eritreans were already hostile towards the Ethiopians, the Ethiopians wanting payback against the Eritreans mutilated the Eritrean POWs. So in the end, it was an embarrassing defeat for the Italians, and 2 of their best generals were killed in action during the Battle of Adwa. So it was not only an embarrassing defeat in the Battle of Adwa, which ultimately ended the war, but it was an embarrassing defeat for the entirety of the Italian nation. Now, I'm also going to talk about the Second Italo-Abyssinian War. What started the Second Italian-Abyssinian War, if we fast forward to the 1930s, 1930s. So the first Italo-Ethiopian War has been over for about 40 years. Italy has now been taken over by a fascist government led by Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini and the fascist black shirts are now in control of Italy, a nation that was unstable in the previous decade. So Benito Mussolini has rooted out all corruption in his country, and he's gotten rid of the mob either by having the mobsters executed or deported. Unfortunately, they all moved to America. Why do we keep getting everybody's criminals? Anyways, moving on. So yes, Benito Mussolini has stabilized Italy. And to cheer up the Italian people, because at the time, to the rest of Europe, Italy was laughable. Their military was lagging behind in terms of modernization. Italy was still a primitive army in Europe. In fact, the most advanced army at the time was the German army and the Soviet army. Those were the two highly developed armies. But Benito Mussolini made a promise to the Italian people. His promise was, I will restore the Holy Roman Empire, and Italy will no longer be the laughingstock of Europe. This was Benito Mussolini's promise to the Italian people, who felt shameful of their nation's history in the previous decades. So, Benito Mussolini sent 30,000 Italian troops into Eritrea and Somalia. This is where they would invade Ethiopia, because Eritrea is to the north of Ethiopia and Somalia is to the south of Ethiopia. So the Ethiopians were fighting a two-fronted war. However, the Ethiopians were the most primitive army in the world. However, they were the only African country that had not been colonized by any European powers. So they had that reputation, but unfortunately they had nothing to protect it with. Their guns were more primitive than the Italians' guns. So Benito Mussolini, again, he sent 30,000 Italians to fight 800,000 Abyssinian troops. So clearly the Abyssinians had the strength in numbers. But Benito Mussolini sent dive bombers and fighters, and he was dropping gas bombs on the Abyssinian people during the Second Italian Abyssinian War, which went from 1935 to 1937. Poison gas, had been banned by the League of Nations as a crime against humanity. But, as I said in my League of Nations video prior to this current video, the League of Nations was so politically weak that all the threats it made about getting involved and intervening, all those threats and promises were made empty because they did not have the power to hold up to those promises that they made to the world. So ultimately, the Abyssinians suffered 500,000 casualties, and their nation was taken over and annexed by Italy. This formed what Benito Mussolini called Italian East Africa. And this was also the only battle that the Germans did not help the Italians with. Every other invasion or battle the Italians did, Germany had to help them out, because Italy, as I said, and I'll say it again, was lagging behind in military strength. They were outdated in terms of military. They were still primitive. Okay, this concludes the first episode of Special Sundays. Good night, guys. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I would also like to give a shout out to the channel 3-Minute Histories. Their channel is where I got most of my notes for the First Italo-Abyssinian War. Okay, peace out and rock on. Subscribe to my channel. Join the Andes History Lessons Reich. Goodbye.